So just at the start of this video, I should mention this is an abridged version of essentially the dev diary as a complete entity. This is mainly because each of the entries already runs over the time limit for the hand-in for Design Studio. So this is very much an overview of my experience this year and some of the things that I've taken forward, some of the things I've learnt. Specific videos are available for each of the game jams, a video for a review of each of the semesters, and then a separate one for the World's Vegas Brief task from Design Studio. To look more into some of the thoughts more deeply and see how I've grappled with individual assessment points or individual tasks, I recommend going and watching those videos because, again, they're long enough to warrant a video each on their own, but I need to get something in that will fit the time frame. Hi, I'm Sky High Phoenix, and this is my year on the game design course at the University of Portsmouth, at least from a review perspective. Now, the format I'm going to be going for here is going to be similar to my format for my semester in review, however, just taken to the entire year as a whole to hopefully get it within the time limit for my Design Studio module. So I'm not going to waste too much time, and I'm going to head straight on to game development. So, in terms of the module, of course, we've had 5 game jams this year. Each of these does have its own video where I go into more detail about my experience in each case, what I've learnt, but looking at it as a collective, we're going from, for example, Game Jam 1 and 2, where, I'm going to be honest, I was acting more like a solo developer with possible other people contributing, to a situation where you learn that, okay, this is the expectations need to be dropped from particularly what I was expecting going into the course to, okay, this is actually how complex it is to make a game, to, okay, people have things going on in their life that means that even if you manage out the time at the start of the project, it's not always going to hit that. In fact, it very rarely does. To, okay, most of the design work that I was doing in those game jams was, okay, let's sit down for a first meeting at the start of the project, let's do some ideation, let's get something that we can work on, and mainly working on code for those two, to a situation in Game Jam 3, where I actually get to do some design work in terms of, okay, beyond that first session where we're just ideating, to sitting down with the artist and actually just going through color palettes, trying to build that environment, concepting some of the environments at a very high level in terms of art-wise, to actually paper prototyping the levels that we have for the platformer and being able to bring that in, to, in addition, building some levels in Engine to then also include some of the artwork that I did for that, to a situation where in the Global Game Jam, in a shorter period of time, we're able to get a shipped game like we did in Game Jam 3, except I'd argue that the Global Game Jam we managed to get a better product shipped with that team, and it's a situation where, okay, as a designer, I'm far more doing concept art now for the artists in terms of, okay, to go along with what I'm describing, I'm creating some images which actually have enough detail that artists can take it and convert it into something, first of all with their concept art and then going further, to a situation where also starting to document things, even if it is only informally on Discord at that stage, to Game Jam 4, where I'm part of the team producing a 60-page design document where the main takeaways here as a designer are, okay, how do I get things more concise? How do I highlight the key information to the rest of the team? And, in a sense, learning that element of, okay, ambitious scoping, but because of how some things have turned up with different team members and how life has dealt them a bad hand, needing to re-scope down, which in Game Jams 1 through 3 wasn't really a skill that I had got right, to a situation where in Game Jam 4 it's like, okay, yes, I was probably still holding on a bit too much, but being able to say, okay, this is where it needs to go, and doing so earlier, faster, and more effectively, whilst also not compromising too much of the game at any given stage, it's a decent improvement, I have to say. However, as I say, a lot of this documented progress can be seen in the individual videos for this module. where a lot of it is just Game Jam 1, not knowing any of the process really, to Game Jam 2, okay, dealing with the engine-specific stuff and actually starting to get to ideas of what source control are as well, Game Jam 3 to making a game, Global Game Jam to doing so under pressure in terms of time, and managing it with a larger team, and Game Jam 4 where it isn't quite perfect, but as a designer you're doing your bit properly. Then, next module, Design Studio. I'm going to break this one down into the 2 semesters this time, because we start off at the start of the year, well, it's technically not Design Studio, with the Icebreaker assignment right at the start of the year, where it's like, give us any game pitch in the groups of 10. Now, going into that, not really knowing how to pitch a game, and only really understanding, okay, this is the basics of coming up with ideas. Not yet knowing how to come up with good ideas. Admittedly, I don't think we came up with the best idea at the end, where we had a wizard just converting our protagonist into a different animal each day, and the mini game being to get back to the wizard tower each day being related to the animal. But going from that, particularly to a situation where, by the World's Vegas brief, it's a pitch where it's far more, okay, here are specifics, like, here's some art for a conceptual level, or here's some art to give you an idea of what the world is like, to, okay, let's consider controls, let's consider the existing lore, let's consider the narrative, and then being able to throw that together. Now, admittedly, as I speak of in the specific video for the World's Vegas brief, there were points where we could have improved. Mostly on the balance of, okay, let's talk more about specific levels, let's give more concept art about those levels, let's show more mechanics and deal with that. So we don't, and we can probably hold back slightly on the lore. Then, also in that situation, looking at some of the financial viability and market viability for product. Admittedly, I still haven't quite got that yet. I'm hoping there's enough in Student Enterprise Year 2 that something's going to just finally get figured out in my brain about that, but as of current, that's probably the weakest skill still from there. To a situation where, so that is sort of the pitching situation in terms of, yeah, market improvement to that, but still it's a situation where there's improvements to be made, obviously, but it's good enough to hold my own in first year at least. Of course, there's different bits of theory, such as the games of play, such as working with teams outside of your group, outside of your studio, to the different bits of documentation and ethics. Definitely been interesting to get my teeth into some of this, particularly the documentation with Game Jam 4, and then also just some of the ethics is really interesting, but then again, that's probably also just part of my personality, being someone who is, let's put it this way, I have a Nebula subscription, I think in that kind of way, so some of the ethics and legal elements of this, going from knowing what it is to seeing it from the industry perspective and how it can trip you up, is quite interesting, at least in my perspective. And then there's the development diary. I mean, I briefly mentioned this in semester 2 in review, but this has been one of those situations where, okay, there's been improvement somewhat in terms of videos, but ultimately it's not quite my forte yet, and I have been a bit risky with this one given how late I pushed some of it to get Game Jam 4 done, because we have an extension in that project compared to when this video is due, to then just understanding how much is there. However, the development diary I think has gone decently well in that sense. Admittedly, there's probably some stuff from the earlier videos where it's like, is it exactly of the format where it's like, okay, here's the problem, here's how I dealt with it, here's why I'm taking forward. I mean, overall in the video, yes, but probably some specific points could use that better. But for the content in this module, I'd say works well. And yes, things have been learnt again. Particularly have a look at that World's Vegas brief if you want more info, because that's where you can see sort of a lot of the feedback onboarding from that pitch. From CSGO then, semester 1, a lot of workshops. Now, to be honest, as I say in semester in review 1, they were pretty easy. Again, I come from a technical background in terms of computer science A level, and then dabbling in some of my own projects there. And then, so the sort of fundamental of coding level that we're dealing at with semester one, that was a bit of a walk in the park. The exam, again, it's one of those things where it's simple, but you also just get that slight reality check to make sure that you don't get too complacent when you over apply a concept from the confines of the question. Yeah, you do that. It's annoying, but otherwise, semester one, nice. Wouldn't exactly call it a cakewalk, because dealing with Unreal Engine has been an interesting learning journey for me personally. Going from, okay, I can just code in this language, I can manipulate the language, to no, you have to use this specific implementation of the language because it interfaces with the engine. That's been an interesting one. To then also having a look at what is in semester 2 with the artifact, which is, okay, I'm now in engine, and yeah, I can deal with it. Yeah, there's still some issues, but that's mainly because I didn't want to sink my teeth too far into it. I mean, I chose Pong as my artifact. It's good enough for the marks, and the fact is, this was the module that I was like, okay, I've got the marks I've got seem to indicate a first at this point, so there isn't really much benefit to going too far beyond that. And also, it made more sense to say, okay, don't necessarily need to go too far further on this module. This time is better spent elsewhere, mainly with the art subjects, and at that point in Game Jam 4. So, CSGO, I mean, a lot of the learning experience here is just, okay, dealing with the engine and all the weird quirks about it. Then, I'm realizing I have to speed this up slightly to keep to the time limit. We got art skills with a situation where I came into art skills with, okay, yes, I've picked up a pencil and drawn with it before, but it wasn't exactly great. The fundamental skills and the results that I got in Portfolio 1, in terms of, by my standards, and I speak a bit about this in Semester in Review 1, that jump there was, like, significantly noticeable in my opinion, where, admittedly, it's a lot to do with the fact that I'm using pencil to paper, as in Semester with 2, when I have a look at the pre-production stuff, going digital really hurt me on that, in terms of the quality of the final piece. I mean, it was still good enough that I was willing to hand it in, but the fact is that I'm obviously not as comfortable with digital. But it's also a situation where Portfolio 2, where you see some of the anatomy elements and the proportion elements, I'm still learning those, but you can very clearly see that, okay, it's slightly off rather than being an order of magnitude out. And texturing is far, far more detailed in a lot of the pieces that I make, particularly for the specific pieces in the portfolio, in the first portfolio. Then, of course, there's a lot of stuff in the second semester, such as for the game pre-production, in terms of really starting to understand how to think about the character when it comes to what visuals they are, and particularly as a designer, knowing, okay, I want these elements to show for the character. I'm trying to make a character that is written this way. How am I communicating that to an artist, and what is needed? So, for example, how disheveled they may need to look, or the color scheme being dark, and the sort of way to link that to, okay, I'm looking for a character that isn't really looking after themselves, and understanding that link. That's been a big thing from Semester 2, where Semester 1 is very much just, okay, that got my skills up to a point where I can concept art as a designer quite comfortably. Then looking next at 3D modeling, similar to the CSGO situation, workshops in Semester 1. Situation with 3D modeling, hadn't touched a 3D modeling program in my life before university, and quite frankly, the Semester 1 workshops somehow just managed to work and they clicked. Going from a situation where I had zero experience at the start to a situation where, okay, I now have an understanding enough that I know, okay, I can use, for example, lofting to get railings far more easily. I can get edit poly to get the shape of a sleigh, or how to animate that said sleigh in Workshop 6 along the track to get a decent camera view, or decent camera-based animation. And in that sense, really just getting to a situation where where I had that now, where I can 3D model something. But of course, semester 2, as I talk about in the separate video, the fact of what I managed to produce for that artifact being, admittedly, poorly optimized 3.7 million polys, but the version of Mustacolor that I was able to make, that I also show in that video, was like beyond anything I could have expected going into the module. It was more detailed, more complex, and admittedly, as I say, poorly optimized, nearly giving my computer a reason to explode when I tried animating it. But going from a lot of that is just understanding now a lot of that element as well, and now being able to communicate with our 3D artists as well, given, as I say, didn't come in with anything to a situation where I now would say I understand the basic elements of modeling. Don't ask me to do anything organic. Won't have anything on that end, but at least something where there's basic geometry, comfortable working with that kind of thing. Ultimately, that is the whistle-stop tour of this first year at the University of Portsmouth, and ultimately a lot of it is going from a situation where, okay, I have this bit of information in my experience so far, but it's not game related, to a situation where, I'm actually applying this well now. I know how to document. At least to a good enough standard for the Game Jam 4, or knowing how to pitch a bit better and understanding what elements need to go into that pitch concept, or what elements are going to be needed when communicating with artists for 3D modeling or pencil to paper or 2D art, to just understanding what it is behind the theory of being a designer and going in and editing an engine. Again, it is a whistle-stop tour, and for the purposes of this module, that's year 1 done. I'll catch you in year 2.